Dr. Ken Landau. Thanks for watching. Let's talk about Rinvoq or upadacitinib. This is a new therapy for rheumatoid arthritis, people who have moderate to severe disease, made by a big drug company called AbbVie. It was granted FDA marketing approval in August of 2019. That was a very expedited course through the FDA. The drug is approved only for rheumatoid arthritis, but the family of drugs, the JAK inhibitors, janus kinase inhibitors, are being investigated for ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis, atopic dermatitis, and inflammatory bowel disease like ulcerative colitis and regional enteritis or Crohn's disease. So the drug, the Rinvoq, is used for people who have moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis and an inadequate response to initial therapy with methotrexate. Now, it's not to be combined with other drugs in the janus kinase inhibitor family, the JAK family, JAK inhibitor family. So Rinvoq actually is the third drug in the family. Xeljanz, you've probably heard about that one on the television with the ads. That was the first one. Then there was Olumiant. That was the second one. You also shouldn't combine it with what we call the biologic DMARDs. Now, DMARDs is an acronym. It stands for disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drug. And in that family, Humira and Remicade and Enbrel and a variety of other medicines. And also should not be combined, Rinvoq, not with azathioprine and not with cyclosporin. Those are potent immunosuppressants. Well, rheumatoid arthritis, common condition, 1/2 to 1% of the population, often begins in middle age. Women affected 2 to 3 times more often than men, can be associated with death. About 15 to 25% of the people who have rheumatoid arthritis have other organ involvement. Could have cardiovascular disease, interstitial lung disease, more susceptible to infection and cancer and osteoporosis. Actually, it's a chronic inflammatory disease, an autoimmune condition. It affects the capsule of the joint, we call it the synovium. It affects the joints bilaterally and symmetrically. So it affects the right knee, chances are it's going to affect the left knee. The joints can be warm and tender and swollen, and you feel stiff in the morning in those affected joints. It's recurrent after a period of inactivity, so if you sit and watch a television show for a while, then when you get up, joints are stiff again. Might also be associated with fever and loss of appetite, sometimes with anemia, sometimes inflammation around the heart or the lungs. Early on, it starts with some swelling and tenderness of the joints in the fingers and the toes. Later on, affects the wrists and the knees and the elbows, sometimes the hips and the ankles and the shoulders. Treatment depends on the individual, the activity of the disease, the likelihood of side effects, other comorbid conditions, other medical conditions that you might have, the doctor's comfort level with using that particular drug, and then, of course, with the cost. So in people with very mild disease, maybe just aspirin or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, ibuprofen, naproxen, one of those drugs might be sufficient. If it's a little more active, then you might need a conventional disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drug. That would be in the family of methotrexate or hydroxychloroquine, Plaquenil, or sulfasalazine or sulfadine. And then some people need some fancier kind of therapy, the biologic DMARDs. And the biologic DMARDs would be Simponi or Enbrel or Remicade or Humira. Now we have IL-6 antagonists. Now we have the JAK inhibitor family. Well, if you're going to take Rinvoq, it's pill. That's nice. It's pill. So you can take it by itself, or you can take it with methotrexate, or you can take it with other non-biologic DMARDs. You take it with or without food, doesn't seem to make any difference. You swallow it whole, you don't crush it or chew it or split it. You don't begin therapy if your white count is relatively low, because that might make you extra susceptible to infection. So if your lymphocyte count is less than 500 or your monocyte, your neutrophil count is less than 1,000, you don't start the drug. If your hemoglobin, measure of how many red cells you have, well, if it's less than 8, shouldn't take the drug. So they did a bunch of studies. And all the studies were randomized, double-blind, controlled studies. They looked at people who had moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis by the ACR criteria, American College of Rheumatology. and the EULAR criteria. EULAR just stands for European League Against Rheumatism. It's basically like the ACR, but over in Europe. People were at least 18 years of age. They had at least 6 tender joints and 6 swollen joints, and they had evidence of systemic inflammation. So they had an elevation of the C-reactive protein. Well, they looked at 2 common measures, the ACR 20 and the ACR 50. The ACR 20 means 20% improvement in the American College of Rheumatology criteria, and the ACR 50 is a 50% improvement. Okay, so in study number 1, they looked at the people at 12 to 24 weeks after they had been taking the medicine. So the people on the medicine for 12 to 14 weeks or 26 weeks, looked at them twice. And what they found was that an unnamed dose of methotrexate, and that's a problem. I went back and tried to find the dose of methotrexate in the literature, and I just can't find it. I'm not saying it's not there. I'm just saying I can't find it anywhere. So we don't know whether they're comparing it to a standard dose or a low dose. Oftentimes drug companies, to make their drug look better, use a lower dose of a comparator. I'm not saying that's the case here. I'm just saying after I looked for it for a while, I couldn't find it. So what's the chance of getting to an ACR 20? With the methotrexate, it was about 50%, but it was about 75% with the Rinvoq, and a 50% reduction, so the ACR 50, well, that was achieved in about 25% of the people receiving methotrexate, but about 50% of the people receiving the Rinvoq. And if we go even further, the ACR 70, 70% improvement, well, we find about 15% of the people receiving methotrexate and around 30% of the people receiving Rinvoq. So there's no question Rinvoq seems to be a good drug. And those statistics I gave you were from 12 weeks, and they found that at 26 weeks they were a little bit better still. Then they looked at people who had taken methotrexate before. First group, people never took methotrexate. Then the next group, they had taken the methotrexate, didn't have a good response to it. Then they looked at people who were taking the conventional disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drugs. They looked at all sorts of different combinations, and all the time they found that the Rinvoq seemed to be substantially better than whatever they were comparing it to. Now, if in that same original study, they looked at the decrease in the number of tender joints, in people receiving methotrexate, there were 13 fewer tender joints. In people receiving Rinvoq, there were 16 fewer tender joints. If they look at the number of swollen joints, there were 11 fewer in methotrexate recipients and 12 fewer in the Rinvoq recipients. So all of a sudden, the numbers get to be kind of the same. They looked at the pain. The pain on a scale of 0 to 100 was reduced by about 25 units in methotrexate patients, about 37 points less in the people receiving the Rinvoq. And when they looked at the decrease in the C-reactive protein, the inflammation, it was about twice as great in the Rinvoq as it was in the unknown amount of methotrexate. And if we look at the time to response, well, with Rinvoq, it was much more rapid than with the methotrexate. Actually, after just 2 weeks, a third of the people achieved the ACR 20. After 4 weeks, about half of the people achieved the ACR 20. And after 14 weeks, as I mentioned, about 75% achieved the ACR 20. So it seems to be a good drug. And if we look at the likelihood of radiologic progression after a period of about half a year, we found that about 75% of the people receiving the methotrexate didn't have any X-ray evidence of progressive joint disease. And among the people receiving the Rinvoq, about 80% of them did not have any progression. So the greatest improvement, physical function, fatigue, seemed to be Rinvoq. And the dose of Rinvoq, it seems that if you go less than 15 milligrams a day, you don't get as much benefit. You go higher, you don't get any extra benefit. Are there side effects? You bet. So what are some of the side effects? Well, there's a black box warning. And the black box warning deals with infection and malignancy and blood clots. So infections. Infections leading to either hospitalization or death from tuberculosis or invasive fungal disease or viral infections or opportunistic infections. Even if you go and travel to an area where disease is common, where tuberculosis is common, or other infectious diseases are common, you might put yourself at risk. And certainly if you have a medical condition that increases your susceptibility to infection, you have to consider whether this is appropriate for you. So you shouldn't start the drug if you have a serious infection until the infection has been controlled, and you test for tuberculosis not only before therapy, but even while you're on therapy, especially if you go to a country where they have tuberculosis. And you have to be careful of viral infections reactivating. So something like shingles or hepatitis B. Actually, they didn't allow people with hepatitis C to even join the trial, so we don't know what the effect would have been on that drug or with that infection. So, malignancies. Well, there was reason to worry about lymphoma and other malignancies, and even the non-melanoma skin cancers. And as far as blood clots were concerned, problems with DVT and pulmonary emboli and arterial thromboses. So if you're at risk for any of those conditions, probably, again, the drug isn't for you. And because people are taking the aspirin and the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs frequently for rheumatoid arthritis, if you have a history of diverticulitis, might rupture. If you have irritated stomach, it might perforate. So you do have to be careful if there's some reason to suspect that your gastrointestinal system might not be quite up to par. And while you're taking the medicine, you need to have some laboratory monitoring, of course, to check your white blood cells and the number of red blood cells you have, check your liver function, check your cholesterol, your blood fats. If you happen to be a woman, this is not for people who are pregnant. And as a matter of fact, if you're a woman, since more people are women with rheumatoid arthritis than men, probably a pregnancy test, if there's any chance that you're fertile. You need a pregnancy test before you commence therapy, and you need some kind of adequate method of contraception, not only while you're on therapy, but for 4 weeks after you stop the therapy. And by the way, while you're on the therapy, no live vaccines are allowed. Other side effects, common kind of upper respiratory infections, sinusitis, laryngitis, pharyngitis, rhinitis. Those are all more common in people receiving the medicine than the placebo. Rarely people complain of either nausea or cough or fever. After the drug was marketed, they came out with some interesting stories of hemorrhagic stroke and death relating to hemorrhagic stroke and pulmonary embolism in people who had pre-existing risk factors, cardiovascular risk factors. And as a matter of fact, in September of 2017, 2 patients already had died. They died in late-stage work on the drug, one from unknown causes, and the second taking 30 milligrams of the drug. The person developed fever and diarrhea. Then they developed heart failure, and they died, presumably, from a pulmonary embolism. Well, it's not just the Rinvoq that can do that. It seems like all the janus kinase inhibitors can increase the likelihood of clotting. So if we look at Xeljanz, it increases the pulmonary thromboemboli, blood clots going to the lung, causing death in some cases, especially at the higher doses. Olumiant basically can cause serious and sometimes fatal thromboembolic disease too. So the whole class got to be a little bit careful. Always weigh the risk and the benefit whenever you consider taking any of these medicines, whether they're fancy like this or even the common drugs. In some people, it can slightly increase the cholesterol, both good and bad, and the triglycerides also. Rarely changes the body's immune globulins, gamma globulin. It can cause some muscle irritation in a small percentage of cases, it seems. There's the potential for harm to the fetus. So when they do the animal studies, they find skeletal malformations, cardiovascular malformations. There's increased loss of the embryo after implantation. And if the fetus is carried through, decreased body weight. Well, rheumatoid arthritis needs to be treated if a woman is pregnant, because if the woman's pregnant with rheumatoid arthritis, going to have other issues, going to have preterm delivery, low birth weight babies, small gestational age, going to be lethal to the embryo in a percentage of the individuals. So some kind of therapy, just have to decide what's the most appropriate therapy For breastfeeding, don't take the drug, and don't breastfeed for at least 6 weeks after you stop taking the 6 days after you stop taking the drug. Renal impairment, typically it's not an issue. Liver impairment, if it's mild to moderate, that's okay. You probably shouldn't take it if you have severe liver problems. It's fortunately not carcinogenic, so it's not going to cause cancer in an individual. Have to be a little bit careful if you take a drug that's a strong 3A4 inducer. That's a liver enzyme that's associated with probably metabolizing 50% of all of the drugs. And some drugs can stimulate the activity and some drugs can inhibit the activity. If you take a drug that is a strong inducer of that 3A4 enzyme, a drug like rifampin, for instance, maybe St. John's wort, then what that will do is increase the metabolism and get rid of the Rinvoq before it can do you as much good as it should. So those don't mix. Well, over 90% of the medicine is eliminated within 24 hours of the dose. So a person could theoretically overdose on the medicine, but it's typically not an issue. First of all, it's much too expensive to have enough of it at your house to go and overdose on it. So that's not going to be an issue. How do janus kinase inhibitors work? How do these JAK inhibitors work? Well, when things bombard the surface of the cell, they hit receptors, and those receptors tune in some things inside the cell. And one of the things inside the cell is janus kinase. And janus kinase is a chemical that other chemicals use to pass messages onto the nucleus and to other areas of the cell. So it seems that the janus kinase actually activates another chemical called a STAT, S-T-A-T. It's short for signal transducer and activator transcription. And that's really what tells the genes to go and do something. So it seems that the Rinvoq stops the janus kinase from talking to the STATs. So that's how it seems to work. Now, the janus kinase, there are a variety of them. So the receptors for the janus kinase, we have the JAK1, the JAK2, the JAK3, the tyrosinase kinase. We have all of these different, they seem to work in pairs. And it seems that the Rinvoq is a second generation JAK inhibitor. It works more at the JAK1 site than it does at the JAK2 or 3. Actually, it's about 74 times more potent at JAK1 than it is JAK2, about 58 times more potent as an inhibitor of JAK1 than it is JAK3. We don't know what all of that means, but those are the numbers. Now, the half-life of the drug, anywhere between about 8 and 14 hours, reaches a steady state in your body after you've been taking it for about 4 days. After you take a pill, reaches the maximum amount in your bloodstream after about 2 to 4 hours. No impact of meals that's substantial. If you do take it with a high-fat, high-calorie meal, it's going to increase the amount in the system by somewhere around 30 to 40%. That's not thought to be very important. About 50% of the medicine is going to float around, and it's going to be bound to plasma proteins. It's going to be metabolized by that 3A4 enzyme I mentioned before. That's why you can't induce the enzyme, because otherwise it's going to break down the drug. It's eliminated unchanged, about 25% out in the urine, about 35% out in the feces. The rest goes out as a metabolite. Well, we don't have any head-to-head tests of some of the drugs that we use to treat moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis. So if you say, how does Enbrel compare to Orencia, compare to Remicade, compare to Humira or the various JAK inhibitors, the answer is just can't tell you. Don't know. So the doctor doesn't have any real firm guidelines to choose one drug versus another. Well, if we talk about the JAK inhibitors, we're talking about Xeljanz and Olumiant and Rinvoq. Then there's some other drugs that are not yet approved, at least at the time of this taping. There's the filgotinib, comes out 200 and 100 milligram. Also compared to Humira, that's not in the same family at all. So in the Zeitschrift for Rheumatology, that's German publication, online February of 2020, they looked at some of the studies and they made an artificial comparison of how the JAK inhibitors work relative to one another. So they took the ACR 20. Remember, that's 20% improvement. And they looked at people who were taking the methotrexate and then one of the JAK inhibitors. And they found the ACR 20 was best achieved with the Olumiant, and then the next was with the Rinvoq, and then far behind that was the Xeljanz, and then the filgotinib, 200 and 100 milligram, far beyond that. And they were all better than the Humira, which of course was better than placebo. If, on the other hand, you look at the ACR 50 at 24 weeks, all again taking the methotrexate, they found that the Rinvoq was actually better than the Olumiant, which was better than the filgotinib, especially the 200 milligrams, which was itself better than the Xeljanz, which was itself better than the Humira. So those are artificial numbers, but that's basically all we have to go on right now at this time. Now, it's expected that the sales of Rinvoq by 2023 are going to be well in excess of $2 billion. AbbVie, the drug manufacturer, is bringing it out as a follow-up to Humira. Humira is the world's best-selling drug, at least as far as money is concerned. Humira brings in $20 billion a year. That means if you made stacks of $100 million, you'd need 200 of those to get to the yearly sales of Humira. Humira's sales each day are $54 million. Now the problem for the company is that biosimilars are now available in Europe. So there's been a drastic price cut, and they're still losing market share because the price is too doggone high. Unfortunately, in the United States, they're keeping that price high at least until 2023. That's when the biosimilars are going to come on the market. So there's an organization, and it's called the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, and it looked at all of the 3 JAK inhibitors, and they blasted them all. They said they had marginal clinical benefits at very high prices. And then they withdrew the report. They withdrew the report because there was a lot of problem, according to the drug companies, in the way they determined the price effectiveness. The drug companies say you got to look at it over the course of a lifetime. The ICER said, no, we'll look at it over the course of a year because people are going to switch drugs. Well, then we had the patient advocacy groups get involved in it, and it got to be a mess. Well, as a matter of fact, what they say is, from ICER, that there's maybe a small to perhaps even a substantial net health benefit of taking the Rinvoq over Humira, but the value of the drug should be about $44,000. The drug company is pricing the drug at $59,000 a year. $59,000 a year. Do you make $59,000 a year? Well, that's what the cost of 1 year worth of a drug. Not your food, not your rent, not your car. Just the drug itself is going to be $59,000 a year. But the drug company says, we're going to give the insurance company some rebates and some discounts, and we'll get down to that $44,000 a year. But right now, it's $59,000 a year. And don't you be confused when you get the coupon from the drug company that makes you pay $5 a month. The price of the drug is not $5 a month or $60 a year. The list is going to be $59,000, and you're going to be protected because you're not going to know what the price is. You're not going to know how much your insurance company is paying AbbVie for the drug. So don't complain when your insurance rates go up. Or complain before they go up. Complain about the price of the medicine. Well, the ICER also came out with a report in October of 2019, and they said that Humira, also made by AbbVie, of course, is the worst example of price increase that hasn't been supported by any clinical evidence. They say it's priced so far above the commonly cited cost-effectiveness thresholds that you got to be careful. Well, how much does all this stuff cost? Well, if you want a month worth of Rinvoq, and you go over to the drugstore and pay cash for it, if you happen to pick certain drugstores, you could buy it for $7,600 a month. $7,600 a month. On the other hand, if you go to CVS, and you pay cash, it's going to be in excess of $10,000. That means more than $120,000 a year if you're taking the drug. On the other hand, if you get a coupon from GoodRx, it can bring it down to about $5,100, but you get the coupon from the drug company and think you only have to pay $5. Somebody's picking up the slack, by the way. And if you buy the Xeljanz instead, each month that's only going to be about $3,400. That's cash. $2,300 with a coupon. The Olumiant from Blink Health is about $2,400. Now, Humira has been on the market for a long time, and if you go and buy a month worth of Humira, that's 2 shots. If you go to Costco, it's going to be almost $5,900 cash. Go to Walgreens, it's about $6,400 cash. And if you go to CVS, it's more than $11,000 cash for a month worth of Humira that's been on the market forever. And the drastic reductions in the price over in Europe, but they're taking advantage of our healthcare system here in the United States. And if you have a coupon, it costs about $5,600. Why is it so expensive? Because the drug companies can do it, and because they spend so much money on television advertising. So if you turn the television on, you're seeing ads for Rinvoq, you see ads for the Xeljanz and for Humira. Well, those drugs cost a lot of money to advertise. So if we talk about Humira, the marketing costs for television in 2014 were almost $360 million for a year just for television ads. That rose to about $420 million in 2016. And in 2018, it was $480 million. So you wonder why you see all the ads, and you wonder why they advertise so many of these drugs? I just told you the price of them. Now, on the other hand, they don't advertise methotrexate. Methotrexate is the common comparator. How much is a month of methotrexate? That's also been around forever. That's a pill. Well, methotrexate, you could go over to Costco and get a month worth of methotrexate, cash price, $19. You go over to Walgreens, they do it at Walgreens all the time. $75 for the same thing Costco is $19. And if you have a coupon from GoodRx, anywhere between $20 and $30. So that's the story of Rinvoq. It's a janus kinase inhibitor. It's the third one in the family on the market, just approved at the end of 2019. They're already hawking it on the television, already lots of ads. Ads for both Humira and the Rinvoq. Humira's patent is going to expire shortly in 2023. Already has in Europe. Prices have fallen. So both with Humira and with Rinvoq, they're extraordinarily expensive, and they're often unnecessary. We see what's called an indication creep. So instead of moderate to severe disease where methotrexate didn't work, we'll just start you off on the drug. Or maybe you only have mild disease, start the drug because it's so easy, just take the pill. This is an expensive medicine. We ought to have firm indications for who's an appropriate candidate for the drug. Not the way it seems like some of these drugs are used at the current time. There's no question that rheumatoid arthritis is a very important disease. Has a lot of important implications. The question is, what's the right drug for any given individuals? The companies haven't performed the head-to-head evaluation, so we really don't know. So we don't know if a daily pill of Rinvoq is any better than Xeljanz, is better than a shot of Humira twice a month, or a weekly shot of Enbrel, or even a monthly injection of Remicade. Oh, that's still up in the air. But what's up in the air, and very high up in the air, is the price of these drugs. So anyway, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend. Consider subscribing so that you'll be notified when we post new shows. I appreciate your interest. I'm Dr. Ken Landau.